Hello, hello, everyone. It's Chrissy Scivicque, career coach and corporate trainer and founder of eatyourcareer.com, helping you create a nourishing professional life. Welcome to our free training for this month, where we are talking about building a stronger team. I'm so excited to jump into our topic for today. But first, as always, I want to make sure that you can see me and hear me. So if you can both hear me and see me, please type the word yes into the chat menu so that I know I'm not talking to myself. I would also love to know if there's any sync problems. Last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago, we did a session and my voice didn't match the video. And it just looked so weird to go back and watch the replay. It was really disconcerting. So if there's any problems like that, please let me know and I'll see what I can do to fix those during the session so we don't end up with a weird recording again. Fantastic. You guys can all see me and hear me. It's syncing well. Thank you. I so appreciate knowing that. And hello to everyone. I love it that you're in there and you're sharing where you're from and you're saying hello to one another. Remember, that chat menu is there so you can interact and you can share your experiences and get to know each other. I want to jump into our session, and I also want to make sure that you have your handout. I put the link in the chat menu in case you missed it. The link is sent out with the reminder for the email. So for future sessions, make sure that you grab that. The handout just kind of gives you some format for taking notes for the big topics that we're covering. And right now we're doing handouts instead of slides. That may change in the future. We are changing to GoToWebinar platform happening in 2018. Woohoo! So we might have some things different next year. Just stay tuned for more information on that. All right, let's talk about building a better team. The first thing I want to share is that I do a lot of training with administrative professionals. Many of you know I'm a former executive assistant. I run an on-site training program called Elevate Admins. And the material that I'm covering today is from the Elevate Admins program, but it very much is applicable to people in all professions. Teamwork and problems with teamwork happen across the board. I also know, though, because of my experience in admin, that administrative teams do have an overabundance of problems at times. So I'm curious to know what your experiences are. I know I do have a large audience of administrative professionals. That's fantastic. So I would love to know your experiences, if you would share those in chat. And I also am going to toss up a poll. So I'm going to pause here. I'll put the poll on the screen so you can give your team a grade. So the poll question says, what grade would you give your current team? So this is an A through F grading system like middle school. We're going to talk a lot about middle school today, but go ahead and just grade your team where you are right now. And however you consider your team, whatever that group looks like. For some people, it's, your immediate team that's in the same office with you. Some people have virtual teams and people are, contacting one another globally. So whatever you consider to be your immediate team, that's what I want you grading. All right, fantastic. So we have most people kind of checking in. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. We have 9% of people who said they have an A. Really small, less than 10%. That's really small. We have 48% of people who said B. So that's the most of any of the grades. A B is pretty good. You're pretty good. You're up there. You got a few issues. You can get to an A with a little bit of effort. So I think that's a good place to be starting from. 33% said C, total average. A little bit more work to do to bump it on up there to a B or an A. We have 7% at a D and 4% at an F. So I'm glad you are all here. Those of you who have A's and B's, please share what's working. Those of you who have D's and F's, please share what's not working. We want to be here to help you and provide you with some strategies and some things that have worked in other teams. Thank you, everyone, for weighing in on that. All right. Thanks, Susan, for sharing the link to the handout again. I was just about to mention that again because we're jumping into the handout now. All right, so I want to talk about the stages of team development. This is, it's a predictable pattern that teams go through over and over and over again. It was developed by Bruce Tuckman, who is a psychologist. And when I explain these 4 stages of team development, I want you to think about the various teams that you've been a part of. And if you have seen this pattern play out in the past, and also think of your current team right now and what step in development you're currently on. All right, so we have 4 different stages of team development. The first stage is called forming. So the forming stage is where everyone is coming together and people are getting to know one another. This happens over and over and over again in the workplace because you have new people who come into your team. You have people who exit your team and they move to another organization. Teams get mixed up and roles get changed all the time. So forming is what's happening when people are getting used to, okay, what's my role? What's your role? What typically happens is that in the forming stage, people are very polite. They're getting to know each other. They're on their best behavior and they're really just kind of feeling things out. This happens when you're new to an organization. Most of us have had this experience. When you're brand new, you're observing. You're trying to figure out how you fit in on that team, and you're probably not showing every little piece of your character right up front. You're just kind of absorbing and taking things in. And everybody does this in the forming stage. The second stage is what's called storming, and this is where it gets rough. So after a period of time in the forming process, the team then moves into a process called storming, which is where people start showing their true colors, so to speak. The personality quirks start coming out. People start questioning one another a little bit more. They're pushing against their boundaries. They seem to understand their role, but maybe they want to adapt their role a little bit. So people are trying to figure things out, and it can get really messy in the storming phase. The third phase is called norming. So that's when things start to even out. Everyone understands one another. Okay, you have this quirk, I have that quirk. This is your role, this is my role. We now understand how we're functioning as a team. So that's when we're starting to stabilize. And then finally, the fourth stage is called performing. So now, once we all understand one another, we understand our roles, we understand what we're doing together as a team and how we're working, we now can start actually performing and collaborating and creating things. So that is the peak. We want to get to that place of performing. But as I said, teams go through this process over and over and over again every time that there's a new person coming in or someone leaving the team or roles are switched around. So I know for myself, I can look back at every team I've been a part of, and I can very clearly see all of these stages. I remember one team that I was a part of in college, working on a college project together, and it was a major project that we were working on throughout a semester. We clearly went through all of these stages, and the storming phase, we all thought the team was falling apart. We thought nothing was going to work. We didn't think the project was going to get done. I believe several of us went to the professor to see if we could get switched around. But by the end of it, after we got through storming and through norming, we performed like no other team I've been a part of. It was one of the best experiences of my life because I saw that process come to life. I saw that people who initially we had very little in common, we had a lot of personality clashes. We saw that through continuous deliberate effort, we were able to ultimately get to a place of high performance. And that for me is one of my favorite experiences to remember back on. I've tried to apply those lessons in the workplace in every team I've been on. So I hope that those 4 stages are helpful for you in just kind of thinking about, okay, Everything is normal. Whatever you're going through in your team right now, it's normal. People have been through it in the past, and you can get through it, and you can reach that place of high performance. So I want to shift into talking about the signs of team dysfunction. I have 10 signs of team dysfunction, and then I also have 10 core principles for teamwork. So on your handout, you will see 2 different tables for you to be completing as we go through all of these. At the top of the handout, you should have the stages of team development already completed. We just went through those. And now we're talking about the signs of team dysfunction. So I'm going to jump into those. And as I go through them, I would love for you to think about if these signs of dysfunction are problems for your team. And just make a quick note, yes or no, in the table next to the particular sign that we're talking about. All right, sign number 1 is territorialism. Territorialism. It's probably a word you don't write too often. Just write it like it sounds. So territorialism is when people are protecting their territory. So you have a team of people who are supposed to all be working together and collaborating, but each one of them sees, okay, this is my little space in the world and it's mine. Don't step on it. I have this particular knowledge, and I don't want anyone else to have that knowledge because I want to be the only one. I'm protecting my space. I'm protecting my position on the team and in the organization. I often think of this as hoarding. If you've ever seen that ridiculous TV show, Hoarders, where people are like buried alive under their stuff, I think that happens in the workplace. People hoard knowledge and they get buried alive under it, meaning that, okay, I'm the only one who knows how to do this particular thing. And yes, it makes me feel powerful because it's my territory, but I can't go on vacation. I can't take a day off because they need me so desperately to do this one particular thing. You're buried alive under that hoarding. So territorialism can really harm the team. If you've got people who have their little space in the world and they don't want anyone intruding on it, what ends up happening is that people's toes get stepped on all over the place. And then there's this emotional backlash because, wait a second, that's my territory. You shouldn't be intruding on my territory. So that's the first sign of dysfunction. If you have a team where people are incredibly territorial. The second sign of dysfunction is one that I'm thinking about a lot lately, and I'm going to share some personal stories about this. The second sign is gossip and clicks. Gossip and clicks. Sign number 2. Gossip and clicks. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I'm going to share a personal story here, everyone. But my long-term significant other, my boyfriend, has 2 teenage daughters, and he has full-time custody of them. They are an enormous part of my life, and they hold a very special place in my heart. The youngest one is 13. And as soon as I say there's a 13-year-old young woman in my life, people probably already can guess that we are talking a lot about gossip and clicks. She's in middle school, and this is the most savage year for her in her life. There has been so much going on with her friend group, these other young women, lots of gossip. Very painful things being said about her, about other friends. Friends are turning on her. So what's happened is that we're having a lot of conversations about this. And as we're having conversations, I am realizing how the lessons that we learned early in life through middle school and high school are lessons that we still have to apply in the workplace as adults. I'm getting the opportunity now to train my boyfriend's daughter how to behave in groups of people. And so many of these rules still apply as adults. You know, things like she's learning if someone is gossiping to you, they're probably turning around and gossiping about you. We are having conversations where we have to determine, okay, is this something that you should let go? Or is this something worth confronting? We have to do that all the time in the workplace. She's learned some really important lessons around the fact that anything you say and anything you write, you want to be very careful about because it may one day become public. What's happening for kids these days that some of you might not be aware of, I didn't realize this until recently, that kids now, they have text messages all the time and they're screenshotting text messages. So, my boyfriend's daughter had a conversation about someone over text months ago. It was screenshot and has now been made public. This is like normal life for these kids. It's an important lesson though. We have to remember that in the workplace too. Whatever we write, whatever we say, we want to be careful that should it come back, should it come out, should the entire organization or the entire world know what we said or wrote, we have to be able to live with that. It needs to be something that we can defend. We have to remember that our words matter, and who we say them to matter. So it's fascinating to me that so many of us as adults in the workplace, we deal with these things as we learned from middle school. And some of us didn't learn very well. So I think that it's important to kind of remember these lessons from early in life and think about, how would you advise a young teenager to deal with some of these difficult social dynamics, and then embrace those positive rules that you would instill in children, embrace those rules for yourself. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's helpful. It's something I've been thinking so much about lately because it's just very present in my life. And sometimes the workplace can feel like middle school. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where teams have been destroyed because of gossip and because of this us versus them mentality that happens. So we have to be strong in how we deal with those things. When gossip is happening, are you taking active steps to counter it with facts? Are you remembering that silence is implicit agreement? If someone is gossiping to you and you're not, countering it, you're just simply, nodding, okay, you're agreeing. And that can come back to haunt you one day. So, gossip and clicks is your second sign of dysfunction, and it's a big one. The third one is overly competitive. An overly competitive team is a dysfunctional team. A little bit of competition goes a long way. I'm a big fan of friendly competition, but you have a problem when the competition is so fierce on the team that potentially people are sabotaging one another in an effort to make themselves look better. I don't necessarily think that sabotage happens on an incredibly regular basis, but it can happen. And typically it's out of that feeling of competition. It's a feeling that in order for me to win, I have to make someone else lose. I've got to make you lose. And this is not a zero-sum game. In the workplace, everyone can win together. And in fact, that's the only way it can happen. The rising tide lifts all boats. And that really is true in the workplace. When the entire team works well together, everyone benefits from it. So an overly competitive mentality among the team will certainly create dysfunction. All right. The fourth sign of dysfunction is interpersonal conflict. Interpersonal conflict. So interpersonal conflict has to do with personality clashes. Obviously, every team has a variety of different personalities, and it is likely that you're not going to necessarily get along with every single different personality on the team. But interpersonal conflict is where those personality clashes are really getting in the way of the work. What happens is that all of the team members can start to feel an underlying tension and discomfort when there are those interpersonal conflicts that are happening. So that is your fourth sign of dysfunction. All right, your fifth sign of dysfunction, I'm just checking over there in chat. Thanks to everyone who's sharing answers with people who might come in late or get interrupted. All right, your fifth sign of dysfunction is blame. Blame. When people on the team are pointing fingers at one another, when something goes wrong, it's immediately, well, it wasn't me, it was that person. Instead of the entire team recognizing that there's a variety of contributing factors when things go well or when things go wrong. So blame is your fifth sign of dysfunction. I'll also go through all the signs of dysfunction when we finish this so that everyone can capture anything that you might miss. All right, the sixth sign of dysfunction is personal agendas. Personal agendas. So this is where team members are more focused on their own needs and wants and goals than they are on the needs and wants and goals of the entire team. And this is something that leaders recognize. They can see this when you have individual team members who are out for themselves and they really are more concerned, hey, it's just my work. I'm only concerned about reaching my goals and doing my work well. And I really don't care if the rest of the team succeeds or not. Leaders see that. And that can absolutely destroy a team from the inside out. So that is number 6, personal agendas. Number 7 is another big one, communication breakdowns. Communication breakdowns. So a variety of different things can happen that create communication breakdowns. Typically, you've got a problem if team members don't feel that they can freely express their ideas and opinions and perspectives. That's going to automatically limit your ability to make great decisions, your ability to perform and collaborate, because you're limiting the point of view of what the team is talking about. So we want people to be able to freely express themselves. You have a problem if your team really doesn't communicate unless you have to. If typically you try not to talk to each other unless it's absolutely required. You have a problem communicating if people are not addressing things that really need to be addressed. They're basically avoiding communication, they're avoiding confrontation, and then they could potentially be turning small issues into large blown out issues. So it's a small disagreement that turns into this long, time-consuming, emotional conflict. That's definitely a communication breakdown there. All right, the 8th sign of dysfunction is workload imbalance. Workload imbalance. So this means that there's a disproportionate amount of work that's being distributed amongst team members. Workload imbalance. You've got a couple people on the team who are carrying the majority of the workload, and then there's a couple people on the team that are flying under the radar and they're really not doing much at all. That's an imbalance of the workload, and that's absolutely a problem for the team. The important thing when you have a workload imbalance is to understand why that's happening, because there's many different reasons why it could happen. You might have one person on the team who is kind of a controlling type of person, and they want to have more of the workload. They thrive on that. You might have a star player who can handle it and is great at handling all of that. You might have some people on the team who lack skill, or they lack knowledge, they lack training. So they're not able to jump in and take a portion of the workload. But whatever is going on there, if you have an imbalance of work, you need to, really pull that apart and say, okay, what's causing that? And what can we do to help make the distribution a little more even, or to make the distribution something that everyone feels good with? Because what happens when it is imbalanced is that the people who are doing more start to feel resentful, even if they are controlling and dominating and wanting more. And the people who are doing less start to feel resentful because they would like to do more. They feel like, well, I'm not getting the opportunities that this other person's getting. So workload imbalance, big sign of dysfunction. Number 9 is grudges. Grudges. People holding on to old resentments. Grudges. So basically, we have to remember that Things happen in the workplace all the time. We are going to have conflict. We are going to have communication breakdowns. Those things in and of themselves are not bad. It's how we handle them that can turn them positive or negative, and how we release them. If people are going through something and then they hold on to that resentment and they hold on to that grudge and they let it just continue to fester and build, I've seen people on teams that something happened years before and they're still holding on to the pain and the frustration and the anger and all the emotion that was attached to that situation from years before. That's not moving on. That's not allowing yourself or your team to grow. So grudges, absolutely huge sign of dysfunction. And finally, number 10, easy one. It encapsulates almost everything, and that is distrust. Distrust. Plain and simple. Distrust is when you've basically got everybody on the team who's looking at each other with suspicion. You know, they are questioning the motives and the behaviors of everyone around them. They aren't able to truly rely on someone else on their team. And because of that, you're not ever going to be able to reach that high performing place, because trust is a fundamental component for any team that wants to thrive. So distrust is a big one. It can result in a lot of, passive aggressive types of behavior, because a lot of people are uncomfortable confronting these types of situations, confronting conflict, confronting any sort of problem with other people. And so that emotion that they have comes out in very passive sorts of ways. So distrust is your final sign of dysfunction. I want to also note here that I have a great book recommendation for those of you who are as fascinated by social dynamics as I am. And this is just a really entertaining book. It's a true story. It's called Disrupted, and it's by Dan Lyons. Disrupted is the name of the book, by Dan Lyons. And it's a story of a dysfunctional workplace. And it's a true story. They use the real company name. Dan Lyons is a real fabulous writer. This is his true story of going into a new organization and experiencing all of these things that we just talked about and more. So it's an entertaining look at workplace dysfunction. And it's also a realistic look at it. I think sometimes we like to sugarcoat how we talk about teamwork and dealing with workplace dysfunction. It's not easy. There are no simple black and white rules about how to handle these things. It is incredibly uncomfortable. It is incredibly emotional. This book, it does just a beautiful job at describing what it feels like and looks like in a dysfunctional workplace and a dysfunctional team. So once again, it's called Disrupted by Dan Lyons. And please remember, it's just it's an entertaining story. It is not a professional development book. It's just an entertaining look at dysfunction. All right, I'm going to go through the signs of dysfunction really quickly, and then we're going to talk about the core principles of teamwork. And I'm also going to glance through, see if we have any burning questions that we need to address right now. All right, so the signs of dysfunction. First one is territorialism. Such a great word, territorialism. Sign number 2, gossip and cliques. Sign number 3, overly competitive. Sign number 4, interpersonal conflict. Sign number 5 is blame. 6 is personal agendas. 7 is communication breakdowns. 8, workload imbalance. 9, grudges. And 10 is distrust. So those are the 10 signs of dysfunction. We're going to go into the 10 principles for teamwork. Let me just take a quick glance through. Remember to mark your questions with a question mark by them so that they jump out at me. So good. We've got some people asking some questions. One person with remote team members who travel frequently, helping to make them feel part of the team. Great questions. I'm going to save that. We'll talk about that at the end of the session. Go ahead and type your questions in at any point in time, and I will make sure that we've got time to discuss those. But I do want to go through our 10 core principles first. Some of those might be helpful, and then we'll address specific situations after I'm done. Okay, so the 10 core principles. These are the 10 things that I recommend for building a strong team. Once again, I think that we often talk about this topic very superficially. We say, you should be a good team player. Everybody knows we should be good team players, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And how do we inspire the feeling of a team? Like the question in the chat, how do we inspire more teamwork and inspire more collaboration with our team members? How do we help everyone feel like a part of the team? So we're going to talk about some specific strategies for that with these 10 core principles. The main thing I want you to remember is that we only have control over ourselves, right? We all know that. I control how I think, how I talk, how I behave, how I act. Those things are all within my control. I can't control other people around me on my team, but I can influence them. I can influence them with my words and with my behaviors and with my actions. So we want to take 100% control of the thing that we have 100% control of, which is ourselves. That's a lot. We also want to recognize the importance of our influence, and we want to demonstrate the behaviors that we want others to demonstrate towards us. That is the number one thing to keep in mind. For you to help build a strong team, you have to be a strong part of that team. So here are some things to consider. Your first core principle of teamwork, and this you can fill out in your handout. I'm also asking you as you go through these to think about if this is a strength for your team. You know, if your team is really rocking and rolling on one of these, I want you to recognize it. Say, yes, this is a strength for my team. Maybe even go out and share with your team. I just looked at 10 core principles for teamwork, and we're nailing 5 of them. Isn't that fantastic? Here are the 5 where I think we might have some work to do. You can open this kind of discussion up with your team. All right, number 1. So the first core principle is trust. I mean, that is the foundation. Trust is built through consistency. It's through showing up consistently, being a reliable presence on the team. The difficult thing with trust is that it takes a long time to build. It takes an even longer time to rebuild after it's been broken. One of the things that I recommend in terms of, control what you can control is to start from a place of trust. So rather than going into a team situation with baggage where you say to yourself, I've been on a team before. I know what it's like. I know I have to watch out for myself. Your bad experiences, come with you with baggage. Instead of bringing all of those things in, I ask you to leave those things behind and to start from a place of trust. Don't make people earn your trust. Start by trusting and saying, I trust that this person knows what they're doing. I trust that this person has good intentions. I trust that this person is going to step up and support me. Therefore, I'm going to step up and support them already from the get-go. I'm not going to make them prove anything to me before I initiate a trusting relationship. That's the key shift that I think a lot of people have to make. I think many of us have been burned in the past, and we bring that suspicion in with us, and we want people to earn our trust. Don't do that. Start from a place of trust. That's principle number 1. Start from a place of trust. Principle number 2 is acceptance. Acceptance. The biggest thing we have to remember is that the workplace is full of human beings. We are not robots. Everyone has their own unique little personality quirks, some of which are going to be irritating to you, some of which you're not going to necessarily like. But we want to be accepting of people as they are, flaws and all. We want to be able to say that those little quirks that everyone has, they're perfectly acceptable because I have my own little quirks. I'm human too. We have to be able to just accept people as they are and not force them to have to change. Because remember, we can't force anyone to change. We can influence with our behavior, but ultimately people are who they are. And we need to accept that people, being human, are imperfect. And so the more that we can simply say, I am different from this person. I can accept our differences, and I can adapt in ways that are acceptable to me. So acceptance is core principle number 2. Core principle number 3 is respect. Respect, plain and simple. We do have a very diverse workforce these days. It's diversity of background and education and experience and nationality and religion. Diversity is all around us. And we have to start from a place of recognizing that everyone is valuable. Every single person who is in the workplace is contributing value, and every single person does deserve our respect. I love the analogy that the workplace is like an orchestra, right? I mean, an orchestra wouldn't be very great if all of the instruments were exactly the same. If you just had an orchestra of all cellos, how boring would that be to listen to? We want to have an orchestra that has a diversity of instruments because that's what makes the beautiful, full, rich sound. And it's the same way in the workplace. When we have more diversity and more perspectives and different ideas and different backgrounds and cultures, that's what creates the richness of thought and productivity and collaboration. So respect that, recognize that people are different. We have to accept them. And it's so great that we have those differences. That is a wonderful thing for our organization. It's a wonderful thing for our team. And ultimately, it's a wonderful thing for your career, for your individual career. The more your team excels, the more you as an individual excel. So that's number 3, respect. Number 4, communication. You guys are seeing that we're kind of countering what all of the dysfunction signs were. But number 4 is communication. You have to be able to have communication in the workplace. It's the foundation for getting things done, the foundation for collaboration and performance and productivity. My recommendation, again, kind of focusing on what you can do for yourself, is to hone your communication skills. Be very open with sharing what you know, help train other people. Don't hoard that knowledge. Talk about your ideas and your perspectives and your opinions and listen to other people's. Demonstrate strong communication skills. Other people will start to emulate that. They'll start to follow your lead. If you don't feel like you're a strong communicator, I would recommend this is one area where you can never go overboard on your learning. It's one area I always recommend that people continue learning, continue training, learn new strategies and techniques to put into place. Crucial Communications is a fabulous book. Crucial Communications, or it's Crucial Conversations is what it's called. Crucial Conversations. You'll find it very easily if you just Google for it or go to Amazon. It's some foundational principles of having difficult conversations in the workplace. Crucial Conversations. And I also recommend that you do some research on different communication styles, because everyone communicates a little bit differently, and we have to be able to adapt to one another and use other people's language. I don't want to speak to you in my own unique Chrissy language. I want to speak in a way that you're going to be able to hear it. So we have to be able to adapt to other people's styles. And the only way we can do that is if we understand what those styles look like and how they respond, how they hear. All right. So number 4 was communication. Number 5 is constructive conflict. Constructive conflict. It sounds like a contradiction in terms, I know. Constructive conflict. It's the opposite of destructive conflict. So if you think about it, our last principle said, we want people to freely communicate. We want people to freely share their ideas and opinions and perspectives. Whenever people are freely communicating and sharing their ideas and opinions and perspectives, and they're all very diverse, you're going to have conflict. Not everyone is going to agree. And that's okay, as long as you turn that conflict into something that's constructive. Constructive conflict is when there's a disagreement, but people are able to talk through it. And because of that disagreement, they actually reach a better place. They're able to both share opinions, and then they can use that information to make better decisions and to solve their problems. It's what we call turning a breakdown into a breakthrough. That's constructive conflict. Most of us have experienced this in our personal lives at some time or another. You know, you have a breakdown with your significant other, and you sit down and you hash it out, and it's really uncomfortable, and you know, you have to have this difficult conversation, but in the end you both go, wow, that was really actually helpful. You know, I understand you more, you understand me more, we're at a better place now. Because we have this breakdown, we actually have broken through and advanced our relationship. That's what we want to do in the workplace. Constructive conflict happens all the time. You know, you see it in meeting rooms where people have this heated debate about something, and maybe it gets a little bit charged, but in the end, they are able to come to some great decisions because everyone got in there and shared what they were thinking. There was open dialogue. That is turning conflict into something that's constructive. So that is number 5, constructive conflict. Number 6 is collaboration. That's what this is all about. Collaboration, recognizing that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. You know, finding ways to work together to say, okay, we are stronger together than each one of us would be individually on our own. It's about putting those team goals front and center. And that can be hard to do, especially if you are a career-minded person and you have your own personal goals. It can be hard to forget or hard to remember that the team goal really needs to kind of surpass your individual goal, because if the team goal is reached, your individual goal will be reached as well. So you have to shift that perspective and remember that it is about the rising tide, you know, being a part of this team and working together so that everyone can be lifted up. That's what collaboration is about. Number 7 is emotional bonding. Emotional bonding. I always say you don't have to be friends with the people you work with. It actually isn't always advisable because friendships can cause problems in the workplace. I just wrote an article about this on my blog. Go check it out if you are curious about some of the problems that happen with friendships. You don't have to be friends, but a little emotional bonding can be really helpful for the team. And what I mean by emotional bonding is where you're recognizing that everyone is human and everyone has a bad day here and there. Everyone gets stressed out. And when you see another team member who's overwhelmed or stressed out or having a bad day, that you emotionally bond by saying, how can I help? It looks like you're stressed out. Do you want to go get a cup of coffee? Those little things are the most powerful things that you can do for your team. You don't have to be friends. You don't have to hang out outside of the workplace. But if you can recognize when other people are going through it and you can be there for them, it creates that emotional bond, and it also helps to instill trust. You know, when you're there in the difficult times, that consistency of presence, that is a big deal with developing trust with people. When you see that they're going through something and you don't just ignore it, you don't just treat them like, well, they're having a bad day, I'm going to stay out of their way. But instead you reach out. It's such a powerful thing to do. And it's so easy. It takes very little time. It takes very little effort on your part. And it has an exponential return. So that's emotional bonding. Number 8 is constructive feedback. Constructive feedback. A little bit different from constructive conflict, but a similar idea, constructive feedback. There's destructive feedback, where you're telling somebody they've done something wrong and you want them to realize they did something wrong and you want them to feel bad about it. and you are providing feedback as a means of tearing them down. Constructive feedback is offered as a means of trying to lift people up, that you're trying to help them. You're trying to help support them and train them and inspire their growth. I believe that as team members, we can be a powerful mirror for one another. I can't see myself perfectly. My team members can see things that I don't. And I appreciate it when they can offer information that I might be missing, and they offer it in a way that's kind and tactful and in the spirit of lifting me up. Most people do not respond well to unsolicited feedback. So simply going and offering someone feedback, they might not respond well to. So instead, my recommendation is that you start opening up the conversation by asking for feedback from others, by showing them that, hey, we can share things that we see with one another. And if you share with me, then maybe in the future, you'll ask me to share with you. And we can have that kind of dynamic where we can help each other. And we can provide that insight that you can't see, I can't see behind me. You guys can. Tell me what's behind me. Tell me what I'm not seeing. That's a wonderful relationship to be able to develop with your teammates. So if you open up the question and say, hey, what feedback do you have for me? If you do a presentation or you're working on a project and you're managing it, someone on the team, can you share with me some feedback about how you think I managed the project? And you listen and you graciously accept what you hear. You're demonstrating the behavior you want to see from others. So that's constructive feedback. Number 9, we are almost there at the end. We'll take questions in just 1 minute. Number 9 is peer recognition. Peer recognition. So I'm a big fan of sharing credit in the workplace and giving accolades to people who are all around you. It's not just something that is reserved for management. If we can see that someone else is just rocking at something, they're doing amazing, you really admire something that they have done, speak up and let them know. Say, wow, you're so good at this. I'm so impressed. Send an accolades email so that the whole team can see it. Let them know that you recognize how great they're doing. Speak up when your team has achieved something great. Say this was a wonderful team effort. Give acknowledgement to everyone around you. If someone gets a promotion around you, don't think, well, geez, I want a promotion. Instead, reach out to them and say, congratulations. That's amazing that you got this promotion. I'm so proud to know you. Whatever it is, it's just you're giving that little bit of motivation and that little bit of support to the people around you. I think that acknowledgement is it's lacking in the workplace just in general. And if we can do that for one another, why not? It feels good. It'll feel good for you to give that positive acknowledgement to others. It also positions you as a leader. Leaders see that. And they say, wow, that's really great that, this person isn't so concerned about her own territory. She's acknowledging other people and shining the spotlight on other people. It's very powerful. All right. Number 10 is forgiveness. Forgiveness. Plain and simple. We talked earlier about the problem of grudges, and the opposite of holding a grudge is to forgive. We have to be able to recognize that people make mistakes. People are human. They're not perfect. And when they do something that frustrates us or angers us, or we have to go through that difficult, constructive conflict sort of conversation, we have to be able to move on and grow from it. We can't hold on to that resentment. Forgiveness is enormous. I love what there's so many sayings about forgiveness. But, when you're holding on to a grudge, one of the sayings is holding on to a grudge is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. It's only hurting you to hold on to that grudge. So release it, have forgiveness. There's another wonderful rule to remember, and it's called Hanlon's razor. I just learned that it actually has a name. Hanlon's razor says that you never want to attribute something to malice if it can simply be explained with ignorance or incompetence. A lot of times we look at people's behaviors in the workplace and we think that they're sabotaging us. We think they're being malicious. We think it's all intentional, when really 99% of the time it's accidental. They're either ignorant, oblivious, incompetent. There's something else there, and it really has very little to do with us. It's not malicious. It's not intended to be directed towards us. So we have to have forgiveness, and we need to recognize that people make mistakes because they don't know any better. And so if we're simply holding on to the grudge, then we're not allowing ourselves or them to grow, and that can hold back the entire team. So those are my core principles. I'll go through them really fast, and then I want to make sure I get to questions. I know that we're running short on time. All right. So for those of you capturing the 10 core principles, number 1 is trust. Number 2 is acceptance. Number 3 is respect. 4, communication. 5, constructive conflict. 6, collaboration. 7, emotional bonding. 8, constructive feedback. 9, peer recognition. And 10 is forgiveness. All right. Thank you, everyone, for the chat discussion. It looks like there's been some good discussion happening in there. I can't wait to go back and read through everything. I'm just scanning through really quickly now for question marks. So remember, if you do have a question, make sure you mark it as a question so I know it's there. Let's talk about the remote team member who travel. There's a lot of remote team members or people that travel frequently. How do you make them feel part of the team? Any ideas for more inclusion? This is a problem that I hear quite often with remote and virtual teams. People, that are far away, they don't feel like they are a part of the group because they're not physically on site and able to have some of that emotional bonding. So we do have all kinds of virtual communication tools these days where we can jump on something like this, and everybody can be seen on video. Having those types of meetings is great. I love having the physical, you can see me. The video makes a big difference versus, instant message, typing or emails or even phone calls. I think the video is a very inclusive thing to do. I also think that when people are working offsite and virtually, the organization needs to support having on-site all hands team meetings at least once a year. I think that is vital. Because people have to have that physical, personal interaction. And yes, it's expensive to have people travel to, all come together once a year, but it's essential. So if that's not something that's happening, that might be something to get behind and to be a champion of, because it can have so many positive long-term impacts for the whole year. For the whole year, they can hold on to that feeling that they had when they were in person with these people. They make connections that then throughout the year, when they're just talking through video or IM or email or phone, they're able to connect in a much easier, more comfortable way because they've had the in-person connection at least once a year. So I would say just leverage your communication tools and try to be a champion for in-person meetings. Okay, next question. Will you be providing a video replay of the webinar? Absolutely. I do. I keep video replays in the library right now. I'm going to have the whole year in there. And then next year, we're probably only going to keep about 3 months of video replays in the library. And then they'll move out of the library. So, you do have access to replays all the time, but try to watch them fairly quickly because I don't want to be storing them all on my website. That'll get really heavy with lots of stuff in there. Next question says, we have issues between faculty versus staff. Any suggestions to make us all more inclusive? So you've got 2 different types of employees, it sounds like. So faculty versus staff. It's hard to know. I mean, I think that when you've got 2 different maybe levels, of employees and they see themselves as separate, I would look at what kinds of things might be happening that are creating that feeling of separation. I was talking to a friend just yesterday who is a contractor at a company. And so they have contractors and they have employees. Well, the employees are on an all-employee email list, and the contractors don't get those emails. So there'll be a notification of something that all the employees know about and all the contractors are completely blind to. And that can create such a feeling of separation because it's like, well, oh, okay, I'm a contractor and I guess I'm different from the employees because they all know about this thing that's happening today that I didn't hear about. So make sure that there's nothing like that is like creating that feeling of separation. And if there is, try to remove those divides as much as possible. Obviously, there's probably some things that only faculty should know about and only staff should know about. But as much as possible, remove those restrictions, create some opportunities for them to share, what maybe some of their differences are. I love it when organizations do like get to know another department type of activities where one department will go to another and they'll have an exchange of like, you tell us what you do and we'll tell you what we do. And they get to know what happens in other groups. So maybe you can encourage some of that kind of open sharing so that there's some more transparency between the two groups. Those would be my recommendations. I think that when you have separations between employees, some separations, it's real. There is, real information that goes to this group and real information that goes to that group. But creating the inclusive environment is about adding some transparency in there and making sure that you're not unintentionally creating more division. If you've got these, different, well, these staff members only use this room and these staff members only use that refrigerator over there. I mean, try to just incorporate things together a little bit more if you can. All right. What do you do with a team member who doesn't recognize she did something wrong? Like hard to forgive if forgiveness is not sought by the other person. But yes, it's self-destructing. So at the end of the day, you need to let it go and forgive. Yes, you answered your own question. If the person doesn't see that they did something wrong, I feel you. I want to, on principle, I want people to understand when they've made a mistake because I want to help them to make sure they don't make the mistake again. But if I've done everything I can do and they are not going to recognize their mistake, I've got to say, okay, I can't hold on to that. I also can't teach people lessons that they don't want to learn. I learned that a long time ago. I always want people to learn the lesson of the situation, but if they're not open to it, I'm not going to hold on to a grudge because of that, because then I'm allowing them to continue to hurt me. So I would just encourage you to make sure that you've done what you can to help them learn the lesson so it doesn't happen again in the future. Otherwise, they will eventually learn the lesson. They'll have another teacher perhaps, but it will eventually be learned. How can you stop gossip about yourself without pointing fingers and alienating the person or people that are gossiping? Also without running to the manager? It's such a good question and it's such a hard one because I go back to my middle school example that I talked about earlier. You have to know the difference between what's worthwhile confronting and what should be let go. Some gossip, I say, rise above it, ignore it. What difference does it make to you? However, if the difference that it's making to you is that it's damaging your reputation and potentially harming your ability to grow in the company, then it does need to be confronted. And I think that there is a time and a place to sit down with someone and just open up a conversation and say, this is something that I've heard, can we talk about this? I think that confronting the situation directly with the people involved is the better method before running to the manager. But you also do have recourse, in the workplace if you feel that it's creating an environment that is damaging you and making it difficult for you to actually perform in the workplace. But my recommendation is to attempt to have a conversation with the people directly involved and see if you can get to the heart of the matter. A lot of times there's a root cause underneath there that just needs to be addressed, or it just needs to be acknowledged. A lot of times what I've experienced in the past is that when something is acknowledged and it's not ignored, it stops because they know they're not getting away with it anymore. You're just simply saying, I know it's happening and I'd like it to stop. Can we talk about this? So that can be an effective method. The concern about, alienating the person or the people, at this point, if the gossip is damaging, the first concern needs to be about, resolving the problem. And I think you can do it in a way that is inviting to open up the conversation. Remember, you don't have to be friends with these people. You want to have a civilized, professional conversation about it. But, don't worry so much about like alienating them as much as you would just worry about like, can we turn this into something constructive? Like let's make this a constructive conflict where we can build and actually, turn this into something that can be positive for our relationship moving forward. I see so many more questions. I know we're past time. I'm going to go over a few minutes. If you have to leave, I totally understand. And if I answer your question after this point, you can come back and watch the replay to see the answer. This question says, how do you include a team member into the group when he or she separates themselves from involvement with the team dynamic and workload? Well, you do what you can do. Remember, we can't change other people, and some people don't want to be a part of a team. There are a lot of people that have a lot of social anxieties that push them away from getting involved in a team dynamic. They want to come to work, keep their head down, and just do their work. And, we need to incorporate them into the team, as they must be. But over and beyond, we need to allow them to, handle things how they need to handle things, recognizing that people are different. With managing of the workload, I mean, that's a work conversation to sit down and make sure that they're understanding what their role is on the team. If you need to reassess and, reallocate workload, involve them in the conversation. But, we can't drag people kicking and screaming into a great dynamic team that we want to build. Some people just, that's not even what they want. We want to keep it open and inviting. We don't want to shut anyone out. But allowing them to have their space if they need it. And then if the workload conversation needs to happen, that's about, helping to assign, here's what you're doing, here's what we're doing, and distributing the workload as a team together. Hopefully that helps. Let's see here. So someone asks, am I able to share my notes with my colleague who is the only other PA in the organization? Absolutely. Your notes are absolutely free to be shared. And please share eatyourcareer.com as a resource if you think it would be helpful for them. Emily asks, what recourse are you referring to? So recourse in the workplace would be speaking to a manager, speaking to human resources. If you feel that the situation is out of your depth to handle, you can always request that there be a facilitated conversation with someone else. I feel like that's sort of a last resort that you would take that route, but it's available to you if having a one-on-one conversation with people is not resolving the issue. Okay, I think that I have answered all of the questions. Thank you, everyone, for your conversation and chat. I can't wait to go back and read through everything. It looks like there was some good back and forth there with people sharing their experiences. So I want to thank you for being here on the live session. Next month, I'm planning to talk about focus. So handling all of the distractions and all of the interruptions and everything that we have going on in the workplace, how do we find our focus? That's going to be our conversation for the month of what will be in October. And then don't forget, next week, we're going to also have our Q&A session, Ask the Career Coach, where you can submit your questions and I will answer them live next week. I believe that's on Tuesday. So stay tuned for that. For now, I'll just say thank you once again. And I hope to see you next week and in future sessions. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye, everyone.